Are you looking to invest in a solar battery system for your home or business in 2025? In this video, I'm going to spill the key insider secrets and industry knowledge to help you get a safe, reliable battery that drives a strong financial return. With the new Australian federal incentives available for batteries are now flying off the shelves at unprecedented levels. However, some homeowners are setting themselves up for a catastrophic mistake by missing some critical pieces of information in their buying decision. In this video, we're going to cover a number of critical points that you need to know about when investing in a battery in 2025. First up, how to determine the optimum size battery for your home or business. What is full home versus partial home backup, and how can you be sure that you get a grid independent system that continues to work for your entire home when the grid goes down? Why opting for the cheapest possible battery might be a fatal mistake and how you can avoid this. Key price rules of thumb that we use inside the industry to be sure that you're going to get a safe, compliant, and reliable battery that will work year in, year out for the foreseeable future. Our internal checklist for selecting the best battery brands that we know are going to be safe, reliable, and work for the long haul. What are the locations where you can and cannot install your battery? How to optimize your battery returns so that you can get a higher quality battery and still have the same payback period as a cheaper battery without compromising safety or longevity. By the end of this video, you're going to be armed with all of the information you need to make a well-informed decision when investing in your battery. First, let's cover some battery sizing principles. A big mistake that people make is they invest in a battery that's too small for the current and future needs. For example, if your home uses 13 kilowatt hours in a 24-hour period, many people will say, well, you need a 13 kilowatt hour battery. But here's the thing, there's a degree of seasonality and variance in the way that you use power. Take, for example, if you don't use much power during the week, but then on the weekend you use a lot of power, you have a lot of friends, family over at the house, you've got the pool, the spa running, heaters, air conditioners, your usage profile is actually skewed more to the weekend. And so when you pull the average from your bill, the average is actually not an indication of how much power you're actually using during the key times when you need it. Your weekend usage could be double what you use during the weekdays. This could mean that if you invest in a battery that's too small, you're left short on the weekends and you're still stuck with a pesky electricity bill. It's not what you want. Secondly, batteries don't like to be rinsed from top charge to completely flat. Studies have shown that lithium batteries operate best and for the longest period of time when they're operated between a range of 20 and 80%. This would mean that it's a pretty good idea to make sure that your battery is at least 20 to 40% bigger than what you need, and that way you can make sure that you are operating mostly within this 20 to 80% range. Back to our example, if you're using 13 kilowatt hours per day, this would probably mean you need something around an 18 or a 19 kilowatt hour just to be safe. And that's assuming that you're using your power consistently the same way every single day. Thirdly, batteries degrade as time goes on. Most warranties have batteries warranted at 70% usable capacity after a 10-year period in service. To accommodate for this degradation, it's probably worthwhile investing in something a little bit bigger than what you need. That way you don't get a surprise bill in 5 years from now. And the reality is you're going to be kicking yourself if you get this wrong, particularly because if you're accessing a federal rebate that's so big and contributes so much, that's going to make a big difference to the end cost that you end up spending on batteries in the lifetime of your home. Lastly, you might have heard of people making money from their batteries. It's kind of like with the solar feed-in tariff back in the day. We all know that that's now paying stuff all 3 cents, 5 cents, whatever that might be. So the thing is, this is called virtual energy trading, and it's a way for you to sell some excess power when the grid really needs it, and you get rewarded really well for this. So this can make up a big part of the returns that come from your battery. It's generally worth having more capacity in the battery to be able to take advantage of some of the volatility that's in the grid and net a few extra dollars every single month, every single quarter, just to speed up the payback period of your battery. As a general rule of thumb, I would suggest stretching yourself to be around 2 times your average usage. So if you use 13 kilowatt hours a day, if you could shoot for somewhere between 20 and 26 kilowatt hours in usable battery capacity, you're going to be somewhere near the mark to be set up for the long haul. Now, obviously, this ties in really nicely because the federal battery rebate in Australia, as of right now, is so large and is so considerable that it does actually make it more attractive to consider going bigger from the beginning. And obviously there are cases where some families just cannot stretch themselves financially, and so you may need to opt for a size that's closer to your average daily usage. It's still better than buying power from the grid, and it's still going to put you in a better position overall. One last thing I'll mention is the size of the battery also dictates whether you can do full home backup or partial home backup. Smaller size batteries just simply don't have the kick and the juice to be able to power a higher powered inverter that can back up the entire home. This is an area where people can get this wrong. They would think that they actually have full home backup. Maybe their installer tells them that they've got the inverter with the capacity to do this, but what ends up actually happening is the battery size is too small, and so it can't get enough power out of the battery into the inverter to power those circuits. Going for a bigger battery generally means you're not going to have these problems. Now, with that mentioned, another big and really important thing is grid independence and the full home backup aspect that batteries can provide. You know, a lot of families right now, they want to have peace of mind and certainty that they're going to have reliable power, whether that's because they're working from home, they just want to be able to continue operating, cook dinner, do whatever it might be, just live their lives without the fear of power going out consistently. And the reality is, as more and more coal-fired power stations shut down and as energy becomes a bit more scarce, what's going to end up happening is we're going to see more and more of these outages as time goes on. It's also important to note that not every single battery brand can actually deliver full home backup. Many sales companies will promise you the ability to back up the entire home, but when push comes to shove, you're actually going to fall very, very short of where you need to be. You're going to have continual issues with the circuits that you do back up. This is because in cheaper quality equipment, there are inherent technical limitations simply because they've skimped on the bill of materials and the engineering side of the equipment. That's why it's so cheap. There's also the other aspect of some companies just simply don't price in the installation of this feature. It can get quite expensive, particularly with switchboard upgrades and extra cable runs. And so sometimes companies will just gloss over this fact, hoping that you're not going to ask questions about it. You know, for example, in AS3000, which is the wiring rules in Australia, any time you connect back up to a home, any sub-circuits need to have what's called a safety switch or an RCBO or be protected by an RCD. When you have a site assessment completed by a competent professional, one of the things that they're going to identify is what actually needs to be upgraded in the switchboard. Are there any circuits that aren't safety switches and need to be changed over during your installation? This would then be priced accordingly in your quote. Unfortunately, a lot of the cheaper installation companies out there will actually hit customers with a variation on the day simply because in the fine print, it didn't mention anything about the backup and maybe said the backup was excluded. This is sometimes where they can actually make a fair bit of money from you because, well, you're probably going to say yes, but you're not going to have time to do your research and be sure that that's actually how much the upgrade costs. This is a very common tactic. It's a bit like a hit and run. And so it's definitely worth you being aware of this fact. Another key area to be aware of is the battery inverter that's paired with your battery. Most batteries are going to require some kind of battery or hybrid inverter to be able to connect to the battery and sync in with the home. And it's fully likely that your existing inverter that you might have put on with solar 3 or 4 years ago is simply not up to the job. It just doesn't have the required technical pieces of equipment in the inverter to be able to directly connect to a battery. And I think it should also be mentioned that some inverters have inherent power limitations. Simply put, some inverters just simply can't do full home backup and maybe are only limited to 1 or 2 circuits. Brands such as Sungrow offer great full home backup capabilities. And so their SH8, 10, and SH15T, 20T, and 25T range all offer full home backup. And generally speaking, any inverter size that's below about 8 or 10 kilowatts in size should be a pretty good red flag that you're not going to have full home backup. So if you're seeing an inverter size that's paired with your battery that's 5 or 6 kilowatts, there's a very good chance that you actually don't have full home backup with that setup. It's because it just simply cannot provide the juice required to power your entire home. So this really is a case of you get what you pay for. In my opinion, it is actually worth making sure that you get this functionality. Now let's talk about cheap batteries. Now with the announcement of the federal battery rebates, many unscrupulous battery manufacturers have decided now is a good time to enter the Australian market, obviously. And many of these companies have entered with a high volume, low cost model. The problem with this arrangement is that many of these companies just simply do not have the resources, the technical support, and the people on the ground to be able to deliver long-term service to their end customers, you. They're just kind of preying on the fact that you're not going to understand what I'm about to explain to you. And the reality is, once they've got their money, they can just run for the hills. They can exit the country and void themselves of any responsibility of their warranties, leaving the installer who did your job to pick up the pieces. The reality is, batteries are pretty complicated, and it's not a piece of equipment that you want to just haphazardly jump into. They're not like a solar panel, which is relatively risk-free. A solar panel doesn't really have any moving parts and has a pretty low chance of catching on fire or having some sort of catastrophic issue. As of this video, there is no independent testing facility for batteries in this country. This means that new entrants can simply apply to have their battery listed with the Clean Energy Council, get on the approved list, and they can say that it will do X, Y, Z and all the required things. But when push comes to shove, is it actually going to be able to do that? And the fact is, there's just simply no way for us to prove that. A critical component in every single battery system is the battery management system, or BMS for short. Its job is to actively monitor cell voltage, current, temperature, state of health, and everything to do with your battery cells. It controls the charge rate, the discharge rate, and overall its functionality is to stop your battery from overcharging or over discharging. In cheap batteries, one of the big issues is if the battery management system isn't cutting the mustard, then it simply cannot pick up cell by cell level issues, which one of the big issues with cheap batteries is what's called thermal runaway. It's the buildup of heat in the battery, and it reaches a point where it's uncontrollable. It can no longer get rid of the heat in the cells, and so fire is pretty much a guarantee at that point. Additionally, cheap and poorly manufactured battery management systems can have a lack of firmware and ongoing support, which means that you might get a couple years down the road and your battery just simply doesn't charge or discharge the way you intended it to. This could just mean that you lose money, because if the system stops working correctly, discharges half the time, charges half the time, you're effectively cutting your battery capacity in half. Cell quality is also a massive concern in the cheaper battery brands. It is entirely possible that some of the cheaper battery brands are using secondhand or recycled cells. And the reality is, unless you crack it open and have a look, there's really no way to prove this. The best battery brands are all using tier 1 cells, and usually in a vertically integrated way where they're actually manufacturing their own cells, or they're sourcing it from another high quality tier 1 manufacturer. The big thing here is that a tier 1 high quality cell will have less variance from cell to cell. It means that the voltages between the cells will have very little difference across the board. You want every single cell to basically be exactly the same. What this means is that your battery will charge smoother, it'll discharge smoother, and have fewer issues for the long haul. If you do opt to go for a cheap battery brand, it's probably better to think about the battery as being a small bomb that you just installed on the side of your home. There is a real risk here with this. I like to think of this in terms of an analogy of you driving a car with no handbrake, no seat belts, and no airbags. There's just simply no way for you to stop the eventual fire that might occur, and there's no guarantees that you are going to be able to make it to the 10-year period without any issues. I, for the life of me, cannot see why someone would want to risk their home by going for a cheap battery that has the potential to hurt the ones that they love the most. The other major issue with the cheap battery brands is that when they start to inevitably fail, you're going to see the companies that manufacture them exit Australia en masse. We've seen this with cheap solar panels over the last 15 to 20 years, and I don't think there's any reason why batteries will be any different. In fact, there's a very good chance they'll actually be a lot worse than solar panels. The worst case kind of scenario that you can get yourself into is that your battery brand simply exit the market in 1 to 3 years, and then you've got no backup support, no warranty, and no one to call if you've got a problem. To add insult to injury, you won't be able to claim another battery rebate again. It's a one-time deal. Manufacturers like Sungrow have state-of-the-art battery management systems and have proven themselves in Australian conditions. With over 27 years in business and many years of having batteries installed in field, Sungrow have kind of proven themselves in this space. And to add to this, they have an extremely strong financial backing, which means there's a very good chance they'll still be here in 10 years from now. So what are some pricing rules of thumb? Well, the Clean Energy Regulator provides some pretty good guidance and a way for you to figure out what is a fair and reasonable price to pay for a quality battery installation. They state that households and businesses will be eligible for up to 30% discount on the installation of a solar battery. We know that the battery rebate is around $350 per kilowatt hour. If you were to take a 20 kilowatt hour battery size, that's a rebate of approximately $7,000. This means with simple maths, the cost of a battery should be around $21,000 for a 20 kilowatt hour. Now, obviously you'd minus off your subsidy, so you're probably looking somewhere around the $14,000 mark. And naturally, this probably wouldn't include any additional upgrades like inverters, switchboard work, or really long cable runs to the other side of your home. And I think it's probably pretty fair to say that a number of industry bodies were consulted on this based on what do they think is a fair price to do a great job that is safe, compliant with the Australian standards, and is going to stand the test of time with quality products. And I think it is very important for you to make sure that you've got a company that can actually stand behind the work that they do for the next 10 years. As I said earlier, batteries are complicated. Even the best ones can have problems. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means that you need to have someone who really knows their stuff that can guide you on that journey. I've been working in this industry for over 8 years now, and I've seen my fair share of businesses that have just come and gone bust. The sad reality is that if these businesses had to price their products and services correctly, they'd still be operating today. And the reality is this is to the detriment of the end customer, you, because it means that you no longer have a workmanship warranty and no one to lean on. And if you need repairs to your system, you got to fork out of your back pocket. What's even worse than this is if the work was non-compliant, many installers will simply just tell you to rip the whole system out and start again. One of the key beliefs that I hold is that I think it's better to pay a fair price today and know that you're going to have a company that's going to support you for the long haul, particularly with something as complex as a solar battery, with its sole goal being to drive a financial return for you and your family. The reality is your energy bills are paying for your battery anyway. Many people kind of liken this to having a rental that just never goes away. One last thing to consider is that many retailers have a huge number of fixed costs, and some of these costs are not immediately obvious to consumers. This can range from licensing, public liability insurance, home builders compensation certificates and insurance in New South Wales, ongoing training, warehousing, support, aftercare. The list goes on, and this can get quite expensive. My opinion is that a good outfit could spend more than $100,000 a year just on these items alone. It's good to back good companies that you know are going to back you in return. What do we look for when we look at a solar battery brand? I think the most important metric is how long have they been in business manufacturing batteries for, and are they financially stable? This is because one of the biggest risks with your investment is simply the product failing and the company disappearing. Generally speaking, the longer that they've been in business, the better your chances are that you're going to have a warranty in 5 or 10 years to be able to claim against if there is a problem. Notwithstanding this, I think it's really important to be able to see a history of battery installs in the field. How have they performed over time? Has there been mass warranty claims? Has there been major problems? What does the performance actually look like of these batteries in the cells? Have there been any fires? And sadly, many manufacturers simply just don't have the time behind them to be able to prove this. We just don't have enough data on some of these manufacturers. And so my opinion is that some of these manufacturers are a bit more of a risk. And the reality is retailers are faced with this risk every single day. A new brand might come up and they might promise the world, but the reality is if there's no evidence, if there's no data of the product in the field performing as it's intended, then how are we to confirm that that's actually going to be the case in 5 years from now, and we're not going to have a problem where the retailer actually gets sunk because of major warranty claims? Another important factor is the in-house technical support that these companies offer. And I actually think that this is a mission critical aspect to consider. Timely support from an Australian team that's onshore, that has good engineers that can solve problems quickly, is really important. The last thing you want is your battery to break down and for you to be waiting months just to get a resolution. Sadly, many brands are actually outsourcing to third-party support companies. And what this means is that you're dealing with people who don't necessarily understand the product from an engineering perspective. They're simply trained on standard operating procedures and just cut and paste responses. As an engineer myself, I can verify that brands like Sungrow have excellent in-house technical engineering and support. And this is probably one of the major reasons why we actually recommend Sungrow to our customers. It could also be the reason, or one of the reasons, why they have such a dominant market share in Australia. Our team has a live line to all of their engineers. So if we have a problem, most of our issues are resolved within minutes or hours, not weeks and months. The other aspect to consider in brand selection is the technical capabilities of the products. For example, Sungrow offers a 3-phase full backup system with their SH15, 20, and 20T product line. The Tesla Powerwall 3, though, for example, cannot provide full 3-phase backup with a singular battery. This means that 3-phase sites with full home backup requirements are probably more suited to go for something like a Sungrow than they would be to go for a Tesla. On the flip side, if you had a very specific aesthetic requirement where you needed to have your battery mounted in your garage, then perhaps something like a Tesla might be more appropriate. A professional is going to explain these things to you, and they're going to run you through what the best options are depending on what your needs and requirements are. Now let's cover where can you actually install your battery. Battery installations are covered under Australian standards and have very strict location requirements for safety and longevity purposes. AS 5139 states that a battery cannot be installed in a habitable room. They also must be at least 600 millimeters away from the nearest window to a habitable room and at least 900 millimeters or more below. You also need to make sure that you've got at least 1.5 meters clearance from any gas outlets. And you'll need to be at least 600 mils from any other electrical appliance that's nearby, like hot water, for example. Generally speaking, you almost never want to put your battery on a north or northwest wall. The reality is, temperature is the enemy of a battery. If a battery heats up too much, it has a higher chance of having thermal runaway. And not only this, it's going to run at a lower efficiency. Garages are always great locations for batteries. They're cool, they're dry, and they're not close to any habitable rooms. So if there was a fire, if there was an issue in the future, it is isolated to a location that is easy to bypass. Generally speaking, if you can make a garage work, I always recommend that that's the way to go. Lastly, how do we get better returns from our batteries? As mentioned earlier, if you can stretch the size of your battery and participate in what's called virtual energy trading, where you sell some of your excess battery capacity back into the open market at higher prices, you're going to set yourself up to be in a much better position financially and drive a faster payback period for your battery. Amber Energy is a great platform to be able to do this because they offer wholesale and spot pricing models where you can simply use AI and machine learning, and it automatically does this to be able to sell the power back to the market. The reality is many families can make several $1,000s in credits a year, obviously depending on their usage and their battery size. And this can add up pretty quick over a 10-year period and significantly speed up the payback period of the battery. Sad reality is a lot of cheaper brands just simply don't have the integrations and the technical capabilities to be able to participate in some of these markets, simply because there's no programming interface for developers to be able to build a way to trade power from those batteries, or they might not even be warranted to be able to do that in the first place. Whereas the better battery brands are all warranted to do so. Because you can do this, my theory is that you can actually rival the payback period of a cheaper battery, but without any of the risk. Why would you risk a house fire and catastrophic damage to your home if you can simply buy a better brand with better support and know that you're going to pay for it in a similar period of time anyway? That wraps up the video, guys. Hopefully you got some value and you learned some powerful insider secrets and insights that'll help guide you on your battery journey. If you would like our team to perform a detailed site assessment for you and figure out what size you need, where it can go, what sort of payback period, and is it actually going to even be a good fit for you, head to virtualpowerco.com.au, click on the link and submit one of the forms that are on the page, and one of our friendly team will reach out to you and see how we can help. Hopefully you're now armed with powerful knowledge that allows you to make a confident decision in investing in solar batteries. I hope it's safe, successful, and profitable for you.